start to go too fast, just kind of tap off. Right. That clock is 2 minutes off.
Is it? Good to know.
Okay. All right, good morning, DerbyCon. Everybody have fun last night? Yeah. All right, so this talk is lying in wait, discovering and exploiting weaknesses in automated discovery services. So before we get started, I have a disclaimer. So the views, opinions, and research expressed in this presentation are those of the researchers and do not represent any current or past employers. All questions and concerns regarding this research should be forwarded to the researcher for comment and consideration. So please don't sue us. So real quick too, as a vendor note, as we were doing our research for this, we were looking at a lot of different tools that do these types of functions. We were in no way trying to target single vendors as we were going through our work. We were just trying to look at what tools were doing this and kind of feeding into our research project. So our goal here is to help improve security across the industry and see how we can do some things better. So the research team, I'm Tim Wright. I'm a cybersecurity technical lead. My experience is in vulnerability management, pen testing, and red teaming, and hardware reverse engineering. The tools we're going to show you today were almost exclusively written in Golang. So I love analog music, records, and whatnot, and cybersecurity. And then Jacob.
Hello, I'm Jacob Griffith. I'm a cybersecurity technical specialist. I have experience in vulnerability management and some in penetration testing. I love to program. I love exploiting Windows and Linux machines, and I have a tenacious work ethic. Go ahead and hit the next one.
All right. So the hypothesis. So after landing on a target network, an adversary can easily leverage cybersecurity tools and network management tools to gain elevated rights on the target domain. It is possible to attack these services without developing a zero-day attack against specific platforms. An adversary can leverage access to a single system, workstation, or server on a target network, and then access would result in a complete compromise of the target domain. So this is what we are attempting to prove with our research. So the birth of adversarial honeypots, which is where we started. So our good friend Brad Bailey, who's sitting in the front, put us on the path. Thank you, Brad. So we're going to thank him right now for that. So everyone understands the concept of honeypots, but when we started looking at it, can an adversary leverage a honeypot to do something similar? And in essence, we wanted to harvest credentials from these service accounts and then use those to move lateral. So we wanted the services that we were building to look legit enough to allow the service to attempt to authenticate, and then we could try to exfiltrate those credentials from the tools we're written. So a little bit about the automated discovery services, and this is, we were doing a lot of research, we were trying to define what this was. It's a service that when you think is going to sweep an infrastructure. So you have tools out there, they're like vulnerability scanners, network management tools. They're going to sweep an entire infrastructure, build some type of inventory of software, whatever hardware is deployed. Examples, Nessus, NexPose, SolarWinds, ServiceNow, and parts of McAfee all have these types of automated discovery functions. And we're also seeing more and more tools being built with this type of automation baked into it under the hood. And a lot of the artificial intelligence, things like that, are doing some of this under the hood for us. So what's the risk? What's the problem? So a lot of these security processes are introducing risk into environments because they're trusting everything that's on the network. There's no validation of what's plugged in is actually should be trusted with these types of services. So we can abuse this if we're an adversary, which could result in compromising critical service accounts. And if you understand service accounts, if you compromise one of those, it's not something that's easily changed. If you have the password for a service account, in some cases it could take months to get that password changed. So as an adversary, our linger time is going to be very high. We're going to be able to hang out for a long time and have a lot of access with those service accounts. Also, when you think about these tools, because a lot of these systems are whitelisted, they have access into a lot of critical infrastructures. So if we could compromise these platforms, not only do we have a long linger time, we're also going to get access into probably where the most sensitive data of the infrastructure is residing, critical SCADA controls, etc.
So why did we choose vulnerability management as a target for our tool? We chose vulnerability management because for one, they use service accounts that are elevated, and they also have access across various networks in most cases. They also contain wealth of information about target networks and can cross over firewalls. The problem with vulnerability management tools is that sometimes, they often take a sweeping approach to gather data on the network. The reason this approach is taken in some cases is because an organization might not have a good software inventory, so they're hitting as many endpoints as they can by doing a sweep to try to gather as much data as they can. This becomes a risk because an organization is trusting that those endpoints are not malicious. For our research, we chose to focus on NexPose and Nessus. We chose these targets because they were readily available to us, and they had community additions. So when looking for these automated discovery tools, one thing you can do to try to find what tools you're looking at is do like active scanning for the ports that are unique to those tools. For NexPose, that would be TCP 4814 and TCP 4815. TCP 4814 is used for the console to connect to the scanner and send the scanner commands. 4815, the scanner connects to the console and retrieves its commands. Nessus also uses a unique port of 8834, and it uses this for user interface, Tenable SC communication, and API calls. Both Nessus and NexPose start their scans by initiating a port scan looking for listening services that they could potentially log into and enumerate vulnerabilities. These tools are designed to trust anything that's connected to the network and will attempt to authenticate unless otherwise told. Once the tool identifies the authentication service, it will try to log into it. Here's a screenshot from NexPose documentation where they recommend to check the entire private IPv4 space or do subnet sweeping as a method of vulnerability scanning. This is a document from Nessus's, or this is one of Nessus's documentation. Although it doesn't recommend subnet sweeping, it does say that that's one method that can be used with their tool. So this image here shows how an NexPose environment can be set up, where you have multiple NexPose engines, some behind firewalls, some not, that the NexPose console reaches out to, pushes commands, and then it scans those networks. And what we're trying to show here is these are different segmented networks, but those service accounts can be used across all three of those networks. Due to the nature of vulnerability management, service accounts used for performing scans are commonly elevated. And again, like we said before, oftentimes these machines are also whitelisted in various areas to try to cut down on log activity and false positives for failed logins, because they do try default credential checks as part of the vulnerability scan too. And this is just another screenshot from NexPose documentation stating permissions that could be used for the serviced account. Right here it's saying if you don't have administrative permissions, you're not going to be granted access to administrative shares. And so you're going to miss some of the vulnerability checks that can be done. So a lot of times these accounts are elevated. NexPose, and actually a lot of vulnerability management tools have this too, has a automated action function where when a new device comes online, or DHCP sees a new device, it will initiate a scan against it right away to try to get data on it. Process usually takes about 5 to 10 minutes. If an adversary can find a way to trick NexPose into executing a scan of a malicious device running one of our HoneyPots, they can grab credentials from the target domain fairly quickly.
The network management tools as well. So again, when we started thinking about these features and looking at vulnerability management, network management, this is where you're going to see your Cisco infrastructure, your firewalls, things like that being managed. And so for us to look at these tools, they're going to have a lot of access, SNMP community strings, SSH access a lot of times. So if an adversary can get into this, this is where we're going to be able to change firewall rules, change routers, add new malicious routes. This is really, for me, being a former network guy, this was kind of a passion for mine. So we really wanted to go and dig deeper into the network infrastructure. Plus, the Cisco guys are generally a little bit ego, so we wanted to find a way to really knock them down a couple notches too. So again, it's the same thing with vulnerability management, right? We're trusting these tools. The tools are trusting everything out on the network. So if, again, we can get these tools to just connect to us and try to authenticate, we can get those creds. And, you know, we've heard a lot of stuff about more advanced adversaries trying to write their own firmware and push those to devices. So what a better platform to do that than the management system that was designed to do that. So for us, we went after SolarWinds, again, because it was free to us, but SolarWinds had a lot of the functionality we see in some of the larger tools that are out there. It can do SMB authentication, SSH. So it was an easy platform for us to download and kind of set up within our environment. For an adversary looking for this on an infrastructure, there is a unique port. So a single port enumeration of the target, TCP 8787 is the web management interface for this platform. So if I can just find that port listening, I know that you're using SolarWinds. So we were trying to come up with the single port enumeration technique because it's a lot quieter. It's a very fast way to find these devices on an infrastructure. And we are looking for some other ways to enumerate these devices, but for SolarWinds, this was the key. So SNMP, again, it's a UDP query, and using community strings like a password. I've never seen a network team change their SNMP community strings once they have them. If one of the administrators leave, they never change those community strings. They're always there. So if I can get your read-write community string, I'm going to have it for pretty much forever. So again, nobody's really managing these community strings like passwords. They should. And this is going to be something, unless you're controlling it with access control lists, we're going to get into anything that has a community string on the network. So I put this slide in this morning because we had some questions about SSH, and we sat down last night and started looking at it, and we looked at RFC 4252 this morning. So everyone pretty much understands how SSH works. I'm not going to get into the details. But from the RFC, it says if the transport layer does not provide confidentiality, then passwords should not be used. You should be using keys. So this is something we're going to show in a second, that we can abuse SSH at the client. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to show you guys Swarm.
So this is the interface for the tool we built. It's called Swarm to follow with the, yeah, no, it's good. But it's following the whole HoneyPot thing. So what this does is it's a tool that allows you to generate what we call drones or hives. So drone is a payload you can run on a compromised endpoint. So say you get someone on a fish, you can put it on their Windows box, and it sets up a listener that when the device gets scanned from one of these automated discovery tools, it sends the passwords over a C2 back to our C2 server. And currently, we have SSH, SMB, Telnet, FTP, and SNMP implemented. It's written in Golang, except for the SMB module. I wrote that in Python because the Impacket framework was already there. So I just had to slightly modify what was already there. And again, the C2 for Swarm is over TLS to allow that exfiltration of credentials. The drone is the software that's run on the client. And the Hive is a deployable physical device ran on Raspberry Pi that you can drop in an organization and get the creds that way. Now the great thing about the Hive is you have the option, you can put a 3G modem on it, so you can run the C2 over cellular communications, which the blue team wouldn't be able to see because it's not even on their network.
Cool. So for exploitation for the vulnerability management service accounts, again, we have two types of attacks that were developed. Both the Hive can compromise vulnerability management systems. And for the network management SNMP community strings, again, the drone or the Hive will work for us. So we're going to do some demos of these attacks for you guys this morning. Again, this is post-exploitation. So what we're going to be looking at is you've landed on a machine and we have elevated writes on a single host. I'm going to try to stress that. And because of the way we wrote the tools all in Golang, so we can run these on Linux or Windows, then it's pretty simple to compile that, and the tool is right now working that way. So again, I was talking about the single port enumeration, so there's an Nmap can for you that will do that for the, I think that's the NexPose single ports 4814 and 4815. Again, just elevated local writes. And what we're going to, the model here is we have a compromised PC, we have a NexPose engine sitting there, and for the demo we're using Nessus just because it was already set up on our cloud. So we're going to put the drone on side the compromised PC and we'll execute a scan, or you could use the Adversarial HoneyPot, the Hive, and this. So exploitation, again, the C2 is going to go over TLS to our server, or we could run that over the cellular. We kind of just. So one thing I want to stress here too is that at the moment, nothing is staying on disk of the host. Everything is going to the C2. So we can get it out pretty quickly. So this is the demo video for Nessus, and I'm going to go ahead and let you run the demo.
Sure. So we're doing the SSH drone demo.
You guys see that okay?
Everyone see it? Cool. All right, so here we go.
Kind of walk through it.
Is that going to be in the way the whole time?
What's that?
No, okay, they can see it. Okay, so I'll go back. Sorry about that. So first, you got the interface page. I chose 3 for the SSH Windows 64-bit listener, the drone. Right now I'm getting the IP address of my C2 server, which I'm using the server that I'm generating the payload on. It's going to be over 443. I'm going to listen on 22, standard SSH, and then I'll start the C2 server. Then you'll see me move over the payload here. So this would be a host that you'd already compromised. This is post-exploitation. You run the payload. and then you'll see me move over to the Nessus scanner to initiate the scan. I'm first going to tail the credential file so you guys can see it come in when it comes in. There's the IP address. And there's the credentials I put in the same route. I'll kick off the scan here in a second. So once the scan starts, it doesn't take too long before you start getting the credentials once it hits it. You see in the bottom window there, if you just watch it. There we go. And it tries multiple times too. And if you have multiple credentials up in the site, it will try them all if they're for that service. So if it has like Cisco credentials for SSH, and you also got a couple different Linux machines credentials, it'll try all of them.
Good job, man. Right. Cool. So at that point, the vulnerability management tools for SSH, and as an adversary, we can start moving around with those pretty quickly. So it was, what, maybe a minute to get those. So when we were thinking about this exploitation kill chain that we started looking at was, so we don't necessarily have to go after the domain controllers now to get the domain admin rights. We can start to look at, again, these infrastructures, these tools. And we talked about a couple times with the access that have been granted. Some of the stuff that we're reading too about logging these tools, because they're so noisy, a lot of the logging that would go into the SIM has been disabled. So it would be a great place for an adversary to sit and linger for a long period of time because nobody's really watching a lot of these tools. So the new kill chain would be after we've customized a PC and we have the drone running on a machine and we get the creds. If those SSH creds work on the vulnerability management tools themselves, then we can literally just turn around and log into those platforms and start using platforms as our area to work. Now with NexPose, and I don't know if this is true in Nessus, but on the scans you can actually have them do custom actions. So if we were scanning for some specific vulnerability and I wanted that tool to run a payload for me on those boxes, I could just have NexPose run for me, and it's going to do that authentication. What a way to start servicing shells across the infrastructure. So that, we thought that was kind of cool. So now we're going to do the SNMP demo. Same thing. This is SolarWinds, and again we're going to try to harvest the read access from the infrastructure. And go ahead and kick it off.
You guys see okay? Cool. No? Is it dark?
We'll be all right. We're going way fast.
Okay, so I chose number 7 for the SNMP Windows listener. Again, I put in the C2 channel that I'm going to be using. It generates the payload. Started the C2 server. Just like before, once the drone's running, anything that hits that surface and tries to authenticate, those credentials will be shoveled over the C2 to a server. SolarWinds is a little laggy, so it kind of takes a second to step through these. So I'd set up the SNMP strings and then kick off the scan. First I'm going to take the file so you can see what's going to come through. Scan kicked off, and very quickly you'll start seeing the SNMP strings. That's the SSH. Yeah, you'll see them in a sec. Yeah, isn't that great?
That's cool.
All right, maybe not what I thought. No, from the hack from the first one, yeah, the SSH listener. It'll come through in a second. There it goes. Inside, we have it listing that it's SNMP, so you know which ones are which. Of course, SNMP just can be a string, but I always find it interesting how many times these automated discoveries try.
There we go.
Yep.
Cool. Cool. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Hive deployable attack platform. You mind if I talk on this?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. So we started seeing in the news the JPL breach. I know everybody probably heard about this. Somebody had a Raspberry Pi plugged onto the network, and Bruce Schneier has talked about Raspberry Pis too. But you know, companies, more and more of these get deployed, or people are using them maliciously to try to compromise infrastructures. So we weren't the first to think about this. There's a lot of people have been talking about it for years. But for us, it was a platform and research, proof of concept. The Pi Zero is a $10 platform, and the Pi 2, I think the Pi 3 now is a little bit more expensive, but the 2 is $35. Really, all you need is access to infrastructure. You can deploy it. Had pretty much everything we were looking for when we started developing this. So some of the things we started talking for the HoneyPot, we could emulate hardware on infrastructure. So we could build the tool to look like a printer, a camera, or some device, so it would make it much harder to pick off the device sitting on the network. You use MAC address cloning to actually clone the, looking for different types of tools on an infrastructure, find out what printers you're running, start to clone to look similar, and you could hide in the weeds. We also had it set up so that when the code started running on the Pi, everything is in. So if it did get sniped, there'd be very little to look at from an IR perspective on the card. So everything was disabled. So we disabled the GPIO header, the USB interfaces that weren't needed. The Ethernet interface was allowed to stay enabled, but as long as it was running, we were good. If you unplugged the Ethernet cable, everything was gone out of memory. So it was a really neat platform to do this type of attack. And then Jacob modified a little bit more and did a full encryption on the memory card and deleted all the decryption keys. So it's encrypted and the keys are gone, so we can't even get it back. So post-exploitation again, just looking to discover these service accounts. We're looking for infrastructures that don't have any type of MAC controls or network layer controls. You can just get in and plug something in, we're golden. So the post-exploitation, we talked about this a couple times now. We can either run this over 3G or LS. And as a red teamer, if you want to go in and actually controls first and run everything out to see if the blue team is actually picking up your data, you can do that and then have the 3G as a backup if you do get sniped and shut down. If they don't, then you can continue to run over TLS and you're good to go. You never have to use the 3. So for this demo, again, we're deploying it. The NexPose scanner is going to scan, and then we're going to shovel the creds out. And this is, so we're going to see hashes coming through on this one. Oh, so let me hand it over.
First video I'm going to show you is the